Hello and welcome to the Car Care channel, and welcome to a 2007 Toyota Corolla. One of my favorite Corollas. This one is a really good one. But today we are going to replace some struts on this Corolla. One of them is blown, making noise over bumps, and I'll share with you some of the tips and tricks when you are replacing struts. Struts typically are DIY friendly. However, there are some dangers that you need to be aware of, some odds and ends that we're going to talk about in this video and more right after this. Okay, let's get started here. First thing is, let's lift the car up. Let's get the wheels off. So the first thing we're going to talk about is strut replacement criteria. We've talked about this in a previous video, but let's put it all in one video. Struts. This is a McPherson strut design. So the coil spring is right here. You have a strut and a mount at the top. Struts usually will leak from here. From this area, they will leak. When you have a leak in this area, this is when we start actively looking for issues. If your leak is only here, but you have nothing here, do not replace the strut yet. Unless you have noise issues or a concern otherwise. If your oil has made its way here, that's a big enough leak where we need to do something about it, like replace the strut. In this case, this strut is completely blown. I have oil all the way to the bottom. I hope you can see it well on camera, and we're going to compare it to the other side. Look at the appearance of this. We're not talking about a lot of oil that's going to be dripping on the ground. These struts don't hold a lot of oil. Let's go to the other side, which is not blown, and you will kind of see the comparison of how this should look like. This strut is not blown in this side. Look at that appearance. This is not a blown strut. You look at the top, it's fully dry. We don't have any issues with this one. So this is how you have the guide. When do you actually replace the strut? Now, when you replace struts, there are other considerations. Whenever you replace a McPherson strut on a Toyota, always replace the top mount. You will always have issues with the mount, especially if you have a blown strut like the other side. So let's get started on this side. We want to disconnect everything from the strut. In McPherson strut designs, you'll always have them in the front. Majority of Toyotas, even some of the Lexus side, they'll have McPherson in the front. Some of them will have it in the back as well. It'll be the same setup. You have your sway bar link right here. You're going to have to disconnect. If you live in the non-rusty belt, you're going to use a hex right here to hold the middle and turn. In the rusty belt land, this will just strip, and we'll show you how to do this in rusty land area. Usually they'll have two bolts. These are camber bolts. We'll talk about the adjustments and alignments towards the end of the video. And sometimes you'll have your brake line, like right here, if you look at it, your brake line is attached. Sometimes your ABS wire will be attached. So this will vary by model, but this is really it. You're not going to have more stuff attached to the strut. Having said that, let's start removing our sway bar link. As we are in rusty land, we're going to use some PB blaster. Just put some on the nut for the sway bar link. These are notorious to seize. So here is how you deal with these in the rusty land, where we're not going to use the non-rusty cars hex. You're going to get vice grips. It's very skinny ones. These happen to be a Snap-on brand one. You can get any ones. They don't have to be Snap-on. I'm going to put it in the back. And we're going to get as strong a grip as possible. There we go. Now you want a strong impact, and this is where this will really help you to have a strong impact. We're going to try this. It's either going to come off or it's going to start spinning, and now we go back to square one. Let's try this. Well, of course, since we are doing a video, this came out very, very easily. Usually that's not the case, folks. And especially if you have a Camry where this stud is long, you're gonna have a large exposed part. So I'll share with you a few tricks if this is stuck and basically the whole thing starts spinning. You can use heat. Heat destroys the rubber boot, and now this could potentially destroy the sway bar link. You could also find a second nut, run it on the stud to clean the thread before you remove it. That helps a lot. Patience is important here. Otherwise, just get new sway bar links and cut them and be done, because sometimes they'll never come out. Now we're gonna get our brake hose loose from the strut. Sometimes you'll have a speed sensor wire. Sometimes it's a 14, 12, or a 10. In this case, we have a 14. And take it out. There we go. That is now clear. Move it away. Make sure you protect these. Now we're going to remove the 2 bolts that hold the strut to the knuckle. When you remove these bolts, always remove the nut, not the bolt. So these are 19s. Most of them are actually 22s. On the smaller cars, when you get into Corolla, you're going to get into the 19s, but majority of them are 22 millimeter. You're going to hold the bolt with a nut, with a wrench. The same in the other one. Move our bolt. This is a camber bolt. You notice when I have the bolt here, we can actually move this. Look at your wheel. I can move it in and out, change the camber angle. This is your first adjustment. This is the first reason you actually do need an alignment after you do MacPherson struts in the front. We'll talk about that in a section in this video toward the end when we're done with the job. But we're gonna get our bolts out. You want to watch 2 things not to happen. Don't let this fall, because what's going to happen is you're going to pull your axle out. So don't let it fall. Push the strut in and move this to the side and let it stand. Don't pull on it towards you. In this case, we're going to move it to the side, move it in, and it stays. They will usually stay, but if you feel more comfortable, you're always welcome to bungee cord it, and we're good. Now this strut is done. It's disconnected from the bottom. We're gonna lower the car, get it out from the top, and I'll show you a few things that you need to watch for. Then you're gonna find your strut mount nuts. In majority of these cars, these are just sitting right here under the hood. In some SUVs, minivans, these will actually be underneath the cowl. So in some of those you have to pull the wipers, pull the cowl. Sometimes you have to remove the wiper motor. It's not a huge deal, but just it adds a little bit more work. In this case, they are 12 millimeters. Majority of them are going to be 14 originals. If you're putting aftermarket mounts or quick struts, they come with new nuts. Use the originals. This is from experience. Remove 2 nuts, and then the last one, if you just take that off, the strut will fall and usually will damage the axle. So you're going to reach with one hand, grab the strut, just like this. I'm grabbing it with force. And then with the other hand, take the nut out and then guide it out. Make sure you don't hit the axle, you don't push on this to overextend the axle. And there we go. Here's our strut and our mount and everything. Now, we're gonna do the scariest job that looks so simple from far away, but this is extremely scary. Folks, this spring is under pressure, and the pressure is between this part of the strut and this upper mount, this lower mount. This spring, if you just take this bolt here right now, this will jump, hit me, camera, arrows, and the roof. That's the pressure these are under. Be very careful. What holds the weight of the car, what sets the ride height of the car, is the spring, not the strut. So the car weight is sitting on the spring. That's why when springs break, the car falls to the ground. All the strut does is absorb the fast movements of the spring. That's all it does. So be careful with these. The tool you will use right now is a professional tool. I don't expect anyone to buy a DIY. There are tools that clamp here. Whatever you do, always be careful with these. Don't take them lightly. Don't mishandle them. Be careful when you work with these. Having said that, let's introduce you to the tool that we have. This is an OTC Strut Tamer 2 Extreme, I guess. So this has two features that make it safe. First, this has a stand, so I can stand in the backside and crank it, so I'm not looking at the strut as it pops. The second thing that is a safety feature, this has these arms that hold the spring. Even if something pops, this will be locked. You tighten this nut and it locks it. This will be locked where this, even if the spring slides, it's not going to come flying out. And the other thing is, it has these other locks, so the spring wouldn't pop this way. So this locks the arms. The spring is not going anywhere. And that's why I decided to buy this when we opened the shop, because this is probably one of the safest ones if you do this a lot. In case you're a shop owner watching or something, this is a really good tool for that. Doesn't make sense for DIY, it's too expensive. So we're going to set our spring. So here's the lock. Now I'm going to lock it with the nut. When I lock it like this, this is now, even if it slides, it's not going anywhere. Same thing with the other side. I'm going to lock it. I'm going to slide it. I'm going to go to the lowest point where we can grab the spring here. Like you see how I can't turn it anymore? That is the lowest point. That's where we want to go. Same thing at the top. Grab the lowest point, which is this one. I'm going to start to lightly just move the arms in position. There we go. Lock it. Now that we have done our first lock, we want to make sure whenever, even if you have a DIY tool and you're positioning it, you want to make sure that your strut is straight. This one, you see how it's sideways? We want to do this. You want it to be straight so the force is not getting pushed to the side, it's straight down. Now that we have it straight down, I'm going to lock my safeties. Double check these. And let's compress our strut. Do you see what just happened? When you get to a point, like let's say you're using the DIY compressors, which are basically the same as these. They're just in one line and they compress each side. When you get to a point where your strut is loose like this, that's it. We're ready to take this out. In some models, you'll have a cover here. Some models you won't. This one happened to have it, so we're going to make sure that goes back. In some models, you will have a fixed, or not a fixed, but more of a loaded mount. This is not a loaded mount. Look at this. I can just keep spinning it, and it'll keep spinning. There's one precaution with the free-floating mount, which you're going to find this in Corolla, but if you have a Camry, Highlander, it's going to have a loaded mount where you can't turn it easily. The other one, not so much. This one, when you take the nut, this will have a tendency of spinning and actually hurting your hand. So here's what you do with these. You're gonna get a screwdriver and hold it. Even if this spins either direction, this is not gonna damage your hand. So with that, loosen the middle nut. Now that it's loose, actually take this out. In some cases, especially if you have a Sienna or Highlander or any model that has the mount underneath the cowl. This will have a tendency of rusting right here, and you won't be able to just pull them out like that. You're gonna have to wrestle it out. In those cases, tap in the middle of the shaft of the strut right here. You're gonna put a chisel or a drift right here and tap it down. Don't hit it with a hammer and mushroom the head, then you can't pull the mount like this. Put your mount to the side. Let's get our strut out. Now, let's talk about the parts that we're gonna replace here. This is a bump stop. This basically stops this strut from bottoming out. You notice, because this one is a blown strut, how many times it completely destroyed the bump stop. For reference, this is the new bump stop. Look how much of it is gone because this strut has been hammering away for a very long time. The other casualty is the, I call it the spaghetti. The insulator, it's called. What happens with these insulators, this is just a rubber boot that protects the strut from dust and dirt. It comes apart like this with age. It's rubber, and especially when oil gets on it, it comes apart. It gets jammed inside of this. Do you see I'm pulling this? This is part of the insulator. This will make a lot of noise, like squeaking noises. Whenever you see this, replace the bump stop as well. We still have more of that. This strut is basically doing nothing. I am just, now it's doing something. But watch this. It won't come back up. This is not doing anything. Basically, the force of the car will just rattle this to nothing. Now, let's look at our new strut and we'll compare it with our old strut so you also have an idea. If you had noise and you're taking some of these struts apart, you will be able to tell why they're making noise or what's going on. These are new Toyota struts. I always recommend you install Toyota struts, not aftermarket. Toyota struts will always have a new nut, the top nut, which is actually a lock nut. If you look in the middle of it, it has that rubber section that now is new. When you tighten it, it's actually going to take shape and lock itself. So it is very important that we get a new nut every single time. And struts, with the exception of trucks, will always be different side to side. This is the correct side. The way you know it is where the sway bar mounts. Sway bar link right here, sway bar link right here. This is the right side. Now let's compare the new one. See how that comes right back up? That's how it should be. Strong force to push it in, and it comes right back all the way to its maximum height. Not so much with this one, because this one is done. We're going to swap parts here. I'm going to swap this rubber mount, clean it up a little bit. These are just standard swap parts. In all my career, I've never really replaced these bottom ones. Even if they have a tear or two, all they do is just seat the spring, and that's it. They don't cause any noise, they don't cause any issues. Having gotten to this point, we're also going to get a new bump stop because the other one is destroyed. These are very inexpensive, and if you feel like it, just replace them every time. It wouldn't hurt. This will actually protect your suspension in hard bumps. We also have new insulators. All this spaghetti that we pulled out, someday nearer to 2007, used to look like this. This sits right here, protects the strut from all kinds of dust and dirt and water getting on the shaft and potentially making its way to the seal, which is potentially why that leaked. Don't take this strut apart just to replace this. There's no point. Just wait for the strut to fail and replace everything. Unless you're doing this DIY, which at that point you're getting it, why don't you just replace them, be done. To replace this usually will sit. We have all kinds of stuff falling apart here. This sits underneath the bottom mount, which this is just a piece of metal. There's nothing really here. You're gonna find the right orientation, which will have some kind of mark, which the mark is right here. You see this mark is right here. So we're going to remove this and put this in the exact same spot. This is not as essential, but this locates your rubber boot in a way where it's not going to come to the side and be all twisted up. Do it right. This is simple stuff. Do this stuff right. And then this also has a locator that will come here. Some models, this rubber or this part will say out, where this is the part that's outside the car. In this case, we just have a locator. We're going to use that. And then we also have a new mount. And this mount is slightly different than the standard type. This mount has the bearing built into it, because this is a floating mount. This is why this mount just spins freely. The other styles do not. In some models, this bearing will be separate. They rarely fail unless there is actually an issue. So if you want to replace it, they're actually inexpensive. You're welcome to, but it's not commonly replaced unless the bearing has issues. That bearing turns every time you turn the wheel. It's not spinning at high speeds. These bearings last the life of the car, basically. Now, depending on your style of mount, if you have a free-floating mount like this one, you're going to have two notches right here on the strut shaft, which these two notches will end up locked right here. This is very important that you line this up correctly before we compress the strut back. On the non-free floating mount, or the mount that moves slightly but hard and has a separate bearing, the shaft of the strut where the thread is will have a cutout, and that goes through the mount. Having said that, got everything positioned, let's install our strut. You want to watch where the spring ends and where it beds right here. This is how you're going to know how to orientate it. We're going to push it through. Till it sits right there. Now we're going to make sure that our bottom is engaged, which it is. Make sure it's still lined up. And we're going to install our new nut. And to hold this strut in position so it wouldn't keep falling, we're going to use a vice grip. Doesn't have to be under extreme force, it just needs to be strong enough to hold it up. There we go. This is just going to hold it up so we can position everything, make sure this is engaged. Which it is engaged. This is lined up. Going to hold it. Bottom mount turned, so we're going to turn it back to its original location. That's it. That's back in its original location. That's good. Now we're going to decompress it a little bit. Make sure everything is seated properly and nothing has shifted. We're still in the correct position. In this case, looks like we are. Make sure your spring is seated in the correct spot. This one moved a little bit. Things looking good. I just see one thing. Just because I'm OCD, I like this to be a little perfect. All right. That's it. This is one strut done and ready to go back in the car. Once you tighten your top nut, the danger is over. Because now even if something slips and falls, there's something that's going to hold it. There we go. I like how this looks. This is how a strut should look like. Basically, our tab and opening is facing the outside, and that's what they wanted. Now this strut is missing one thing, this cap. Always put these caps back. This protects the inside of the bearing from rust. They're not just there for beauty and make it look nice. This is an open bearing. You want to protect it from water getting in it. Having said that, we're gonna go put it back in the car. This is ideally a two-person job. I'm gonna do it in myself. Usually, there's no point in straining her back. Just have somebody help you. You put the strut from the bottom, somebody starts the nuts. You can do it alone, just like I am doing right now. But I'll tell you, it's better to work in a team when it comes to stuff like this. Look at that. So you get one nut on, you can let go. Tighten these. Let's raise the car up, connect everything at the bottom, then we'll talk about what needs to happen after this job, alignment-wise. Now that we got it like this, you're gonna position your strut, lift this up, push it in. Sometimes your axle will come out, so you have to position it. There we go. Let's get one of our bolts. One thing about these bolts, always push them all the way through. Don't start tightening because this could damage the knuckle. Because remember, these have a shoulder here. There we go. Tighten these bolts. Always put these in the right direction. It doesn't make a huge difference if you put them the other way, but you'll realize that tightening them from here, you gotta now remove the caliper because now the hose is in your way to put any kind of wrench here. So they put them like this for a specific reason. Now we got this, put our brake line back. Last but not least, the sway bar link. You do not have to replace, some people have a tendency of replacing the sway bar links every single time they do struts. You actually do not have to do that. This strut is complete. Now rinse and repeat for the other side and we're good to go. Let's talk about some things you need to do after this job is complete. The first thing is, when you replace one strut, you always replace the other side. Never just replace one strut. This really affects your ride quality. It's just like your shoes. When one shoe rips, you don't just replace the one, you replace the two. Can you replace the one? Yes. Is it a good idea? Probably not. The same thing here. You want even struts on both sides. Same thing with the springs. You don't just replace one spring, you replace both. And this goes the same. Springs, if they're not broken, you're welcome to reuse them. There's no issues, there's no need to replace the spring. The only time you replace the spring, if it's broken or if the car is sagging on one side or the overall ride height has come down. The other thing is alignment. If you do front struts on a Toyota model that is not a truck, that is not a body on frame, you do need to do alignment only if you do front struts, because that changes the camber, which in turn changes the toe, so you do need an alignment afterwards. But let's say if you have a Camry with McPherson rear struts, you do not need to do an alignment if you change the rear. You cannot change the camber. The rear bolts do not have camber adjustments, unlike the front. That's by design. If you have a truck, 4Runner, GX, Sequoia, Tundra, all the body on frame trucks, you do front struts, you do not need to do an alignment because you did not change the camber. The camber is controlled by the camber bolts and in the control arms. You did not change that, so there's no need to do an alignment on these. An alignment is essential after you do a McPherson strut because your camber is out, potentially, or it moved a little bit. It might have still been under spec, but your toe changed, and that could really damage your tires on a long term. If you drive it for a week or two, even up to a month, you're gonna be okay, but don't go 3, 6, now you're gonna have tire wear, abnormal tire wear. Folks, always use original parts for struts. This is a recommendation. You're welcome to experiment with aftermarkets. Haven't had good luck with aftermarket struts. stay away from quick struts as much as possible, unless this is a car that's on a budget, the spring is broken, the strut is leaking, and it's just going to cost a small fortune, and this is a short-term car. Put quick struts, but when you do, buy decent quick struts, not whatever you can get your hands on, and avoid all them cheapo quick struts that the whole entire strut with everything costs less than just the mount. Avoid these. You're going to have noise, you're going to have rough ride, and this Corolla that has, by the way, 207,000 miles, will ride exactly like the way it did on day one when it was new, because we put original struts. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you. And you have yourself a wonderful day.